In the Dragon Ball franchise, we have been introduced to a number of different villains who have provided a significant opposition to our protagonists. Along the way, many of them have fallen in battle, but others have been redeemed and came to join the ranks of our heroes. But which villains would never shift to the side of good? Who are Dragon Ball's most irredeemable villains? Well, in this video, we're going to discuss that. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and enable notifications so you can see all of my content right away when it comes out. Alright guys, so like I said in the intro, we're going to be discussing in this video Dragon Ball's most irredeemable villains. So joining me today in this video is someone you've seen on my videos in the past. You could say that perhaps he is the king of what ifs, and his name is...
Alrighty guys, it is Qaaman here today, and I'm signing in for another video with Mike from Laughingstock Media. How's it going?
Yeah, so of course we're going to be breaking this down into a number of different villains who we're going to be talking about throughout the course of the video, because there are a number of villains we have seen who really could qualify for this. Now, first off, I want to mention something that I know you, Qaaman, have a lot to talk about.
You could just call me Q, Mike.
Yeah, and that would have to be the most obvious examples here, which would be rage monsters or artificial creation. So, of course, characters that are completely fueled by rage, by their own anger and hatred and lust for destruction, as well as characters who were actually created for that very purpose, would certainly fall under characters who would be very difficult for someone to actually redeem through normal means. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's really important to mention this, Mike, because, you know, there's a lot of villains on this list, and you could talk about a lot of different characters, but this list would be like about 50 villains deep if you went into the rage monsters and the artificial creations, and I think we should just exclude them and talk about them generally, because when you look at characters like Kid Buu, Haruda Garn, you know, characters like that, even Broly in the first film, who was closer to a rage monster than he was a more cerebral character. I feel like villains like those are all kind of generic in the sense where they're just evil by nature and by force. They're not cerebral enough to make their own coherent decisions. They're just that way because they just are. It's kind of like if you just look at an aggressive animal, that animal is just like that. They don't choose to be like that. And I think that way we can differentiate the rage monsters and the artificial creations that were programmed to be evil versus actual villains that can think for themselves and did these acts because they wanted to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And when you really think about it, you know, a lot of this concept comes down to the fact of nature versus nurture. So when something is within their nature for them to be destructive and for them to just be pure evil, it's a lot harder for them to ever be redeemed than somebody who, for example, might have created them. So getting into somebody who did create them, the first person that I really want to talk about would have to be Dr. Gero, who was basically a mastermind behind the Red Ribbon Army and their androids that we saw in the original Dragon Ball and then Dragon Ball Z, such as Android 17, Android 18, Android 16, and of course 1920 himself. And I feel like Dr. Gero, even though he is a human, you know, even though many of his decisions may very well come down to just personal choice, I feel like what he's demonstrated throughout the series showcase that he would never really have the capability of being redeemed, you know, and they even brought him back in Dragon Ball GT at one point, which offered up another possibility of him being redeemed, but the guy died by his own creation's hand. He went to hell, and yet when he went to hell, he still decided, oh, well, I'm going to still continue to do evil things and try and get my revenge. So when somebody dies and they still want to get their revenge after that, then you typically know that it's pretty impossible for them to be redeemed.
Right, and I think we could put Dr. Mew and Dr. Gero into the same category because, you know, with Gero, I feel like he's an unredeemable villain simply because of the fact that after all the tragic stuff that happened to him with, you know, obviously Android 16 being killed, and although that's more, you know, secondary source information and was not revealed in the initial run of the manga.
Yeah, that it was his son.
You're right. You know, looking at all of the stuff that happened to Dr. Gero and the vendetta that he had against Goku and stuff, I don't think he could ever be redeemed simply because of the fact that look at the extent that Dr. Gero went just to carry out his plans. I mean, although you could say that androids 17 and 18 were evil initially in the future, you know, you gotta have some sympathy for them in the sense that Gero kidnapped them to turn them into androids.
Yeah.
He created all these creations just to carry out his own will, and I think his evil intentions were so great that I don't think he could ever become a good guy.
Yeah, he really would be a textbook case of a sociopath because he wanted to just wipe out so much of humanity. And we even see, you know, when we first see him for the first time on screen in the Cell Saga, even though he is a human in the body of an android, he still has his human brain. He obliterates a whole city and kills all these people, and that's just like a human making that decision, and he doesn't even bat an eye.
And you know, Mike, if there was one more thing we should say about Dr. Gero, I think one major thing that's awesome about comparing him to Bulma, because I did a video recently comparing, you know, the genius of Gero and Bulma, and I feel like if Dr. Gero could have been redeemed, think about this, Mike. With Dr. Gero's brain, look at all of the great things he could have done for society. Like when you look at Bulma and Dr. Briefs, right?
Yeah.
And you look at the fact that they invented the capsules, you know, they expanded interstellar travel, all of the great things that they did to advance technology throughout the world. If Dr. Gero was a good character, think of all of the great things he could do to protect society. He could create RoboCops to stop crime. Like, he could have used his brain for good reasons, and he chose not to.
Yeah, he just wanted his own selfish goals, and he didn't even care who he had to kill or what he had to do for him to accomplish that.
Right. But what do you think Gero could have done, Mike? I'm asking you as a question. What do you think he could have done had he been a good guy with his brain?
You brought up some great points. You know, I think that if he had teamed up with Bulma or Dr. Brief, you know, he could have really helped. You know, maybe he could have created some kind of augmentations for like the human Z fighters. Maybe he could have come up with like robot Iron Man suits for like normal people so that they could fight alongside them. Or maybe he could have just like helped out in the field of prosthetics. You know, there's a lot of people in the world who have lost their limbs, like, you know, soldiers, for example, or people who have been involved in accidents. And the guy who could create humanoid androids that are pretty much perfect from the ground up would definitely be able to help in the medical field.
Absolutely, man. And I definitely think with his brain on like the good side, like that would be a great asset for humanity. And Earth would be better protected because he could use the androids for good. Like, imagine 17 and 18 fighting on the side of good, you know, obviously being programmed to do so instead of them choosing to do so on their own. Well, that would have been great.
Yeah, exactly. Although talking about Dr. Gero, who's kind of like the mad scientist and somebody who was a creator of these mechanical terrors, the Jinzo Ningen, as BLACKENFIST would say, I want to get into somebody who is kind of similar to Dr. Gero, or at least two people who used to be one, and those would be Bobbidi and Bobbidi, who were originally stated to have created Boo. However, it was then, you know, through secondary information by Toriyama said that they basically were able to summon Boo from his hibernation. And so these are two characters, you know, evil warlocks who used Boo to go around the universe wiping out planets and basically reveling in it and enjoying it. And they even took it to the highest realm to where they were destroying and wiping out the very gods of creation themselves. So I feel like these guys never once show any hint whatsoever of any kind of like good inside them or any possibility of being redeemed. And they tend to do the opposite, where they take somebody who might even have a little sliver of evil within them and then bring it out to the surface and turn them into slaves. So I think that these two, especially Bobbidi, since we see him even more, are just like evil to the core and could never be redeemed.
Right. I think you could put Bobbidi and Bobbidi, and I think you made a great comparison with them and Dr. Gero. They're very similar in the sense where they both have a major sinister plan. Now, obviously, Gero's was more bent on revenge, whereas Bobbidi was just evil on his own accord. And I think, you know, in creating Majin Buu, which was the initial reason, is even though Dragon Ball kind of changed it to saying that Buu always existed, you know, I think looking at Bobbidi and Bobbidi, I think that their ambitions were also so great that they couldn't have ever been good characters. And when you think about some of the things that Bobbidi did, you know, similar to Dr. Gero, I mean, this guy was possessing people kind of similar to how Gero turned 17 and 18 into androids so that they would carry out his own will. I mean, he turned Boro into working for him, Spopovich and Yamu, all those aliens and henchmen and stuff. And I definitely feel like a character that would be willing to just take over people and just manipulate them to do stuff for him, that is like the epitome of evil, and I don't think that can be redeemed.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't really see a situation where they would be redeemed. Maybe they could use their powers for like neutral purposes purposes, but I don't really see them being redeemed, especially after they went and basically became god killers. But speaking of gods, I also want to talk about someone who was essentially a rogue god, someone who came as close to a Makaioshin as anything we've seen in the past, and that would have to be Zamasu. And, Zamasu, as we see in the Goku Black arc, is incredibly just twisted by his own sense of justice and morality. He is a character who looks down upon the mortals and sees them as being a true mistake of the gods. And he takes this idea and this plan to such an extreme to where he goes around and wipes out all of the gods themselves because, they would just get in my way. And he wants to be the only one true god that remained. So I don't really see somebody with such a plan, with such a goal, ever really being capable of being redeemed, except for maybe possibly finding another version of Zamasu who wasn't really tempted as much as the versions that we know, and maybe guiding him in a different direction, but maybe even that would be a lost cause.
I think Zamasu is probably the weirdest character to talk about on this list we have, because, and I'm gonna use a Star Wars reference here, Mike, because kind of like Anakin from, Star Wars Episode 3 and just from the Star Wars trilogy as a whole, one of the most conflicting things about a villain is that whenever a villain thinks they're doing something good, but in reality it's evil from the perspective of others, that's always been a very sympathetic, deep villain to me. And in Zamasu's eyes, I think he's completely unredeemable simply because of the fact that what he thinks he's doing is good.
Yeah.
And because of that mental state, Mike, Zamasu could never be redeemed because in his eyes, he thinks he's doing the universe a favor by purging all of the mortals, kind of similar to Thanos, from the Avengers movie, because in his eyes, he thinks he's doing good, so you can never convince him what he's doing is wrong because in his eyes, you're the bad guy. So I think strictly because of how Zamasu looks at the world, he can never be considered, a redeemable character because his version of good is our version of evil.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. And it's funny because Zamasu is basically like Thanos, but taking it to the even bigger extreme where he doesn't even want half of them left. He wants to wipe them all out. So it's really even worse when you really think about it. But I think that there's also a similar character to Zamasu that we could talk about from Dragon Ball GT, who is also a body swapper and someone who kind of wants to wipe out one form of life, but in this case, he wants to replace that form of life, those humans or those alien species, with his own species, and that would be Baby. And Baby is a character who I feel also kind of falls into what we talked about earlier with these artificial creations, because he in a sense was a weapon that was created by the Tuffle people as their last-ditch effort during the Saiyan-Tuffle War, during the time in which all of their species was being wiped out by the Saiyans on the original planet Vegeta, back when it was still Planet Plant. And, he was shot into space, and it seems like his goal was essentially to come back and reclaim the planet by either wiping out the Saiyans or turning all of the Saiyans into Tuffles, which eventually he did on Earth. So even though he has motivations, even though he does have a personality and sentience, I feel at the end of the day, because he's basically programmed or created for this very purpose, that would be really hard for him to then use his powers for good, because by definition, he's almost like a disease or parasite that's bound to spread throughout the very universe itself.
Well, the thing with Baby, and I think he kind of goes into the whole thing with, the artificial creations, because Baby is a cerebral villain that can think for his own, make his own decisions, kind of like how he killed Dr. Mew and such. But at the same time, though, he is also an artificial creation, kind of similar to Hachiak, and Dr. Aichi from the Plan to Eradicate the Saiyans movies, in the sense where these characters, although they have their own free will, they are also created with a purpose similar to Cell. So they're kind of in the middle between redeemable, because Baby could choose to be redeemable and to carry out his own wishes. So on one hand, I think Baby can be a redeemable villain, but I think because of how he was programmed, it would almost be impossible. However, in another light though, I could see Baby becoming a good guy. It would just be weird since the whole essence of his character is to take over somebody else's body and make it his own.
Yeah, I mean, the only way that I could see it being good is if they went a Venom kind of relationship relationship where he moves into somebody's body, which by default is always going to be kind of a negative thing to do. But then he and his hosts like work together and use their powers together so that they could do good or that they can like defend people. But even then, like his very design, his very nature is to spread beyond that. So that'd be very difficult for them to really pull off. But you did mention Cell, so he's the next person that I really want to get into. And Cell, as I've talked about in the past, is my favorite Dragon Ball villain. However, I'm not entirely sure that he is someone who could very well be redeemed. Not only because the fact that he is made up of evil characters like Frieza and his father, but also because the fact that he, like the androids, is a creation of Dr. Gero and Dr. Gero's computer. And Cell also is a character who, you know, seems like over time he developed into being somebody kind of like Majin Buu, to where he saw his own purpose as not only to be the most powerful being in the entire cosmos, but also on top of that, that he wanted to basically be the end of all things, that he would go around the universe after he was done with the Earth and either like challenge the different species on the planets to fight, or he would just go around wiping all of them out until basically there's nothing left but Cell. So there's kind of like different aspects of Cell found in some of these other irredeemable villains. So as a result of that, and you know, who he's really made up of and his own programming, I find it hard for him to really be someone who could truly be redeemed.
I think you make a lot of good points there, Mike, because Cell, to me, because of his programming, I mean, it's kind of hard to be a good guy when you're programmed to absorb two other androids to become perfect. Like, when you just think about that whole concept, my objective is to suck other people up, and I'm not saying that in a lewd fashion, but I'm saying his objective is to suck up humans and androids to become stronger. Like, it's very hard to redeem a person whose conception is like that. Then he killed Trunks just to go back in time to make himself stronger.
Yeah.
On top of this, Cell is also a character that was so egotistical that he made a tournament just to test himself. That is a character whose ego is so ridiculously high on top of his programming from Dr. Gero that I think his selfishness and his mindset could never make him a redeemable character. Ever. I could never see Cell being a good guy strictly because of his conception and his ego.
Yeah, like I said before, I lean in that direction as well. The only way I could see it being possible is just because the fact that Cell also does have cells from characters who in the past have been redeemed. You know, of course, like Vegeta and Piccolo, two characters who were really evil when they were first introduced, but then ended up becoming, you know, good guys who actually fought against Cell.
Well, remember, the computers like design Cell's personality based on the more dominant personality, so essentially they probably excluded all the good stuff and said, okay, let's make this guy have a huge ego like Goku and Vegeta and stuff, and that's essentially how we got to where he was. And that led to his downfall. Cell pretty much killed himself by creating a Cell games. He didn't need to do that. He could have just blown up the Earth, but he wanted to test his power and he ended up dying.
Yeah, exactly. He had everything won and he basically lost in the epilogue, which is pretty funny when you think about it. But it was a really cool epilogue to watch. But speaking of Cell, I want to get into some of the villains that made up his genetic DNA. So I want to first start off with King Piccolo in this case, because King Piccolo, unlike Piccolo Jr., who eventually just would be called Piccolo, was basically the embodiment of evil. He was the evil half of Kami, the nameless Namekian who would become the god of the earth, or guardian in the English dub. And he was a character who essentially was pure evil, and he was kind of like the representation of the devil. And so, like, right after he was spawned from Kami, he basically came down to the earth and, like, wiped out the majority of the human population in the Piccolo Wars. And, you know, he even spawned his own demon army. It seemed like there was no real indication that King Piccolo had any good within him whatsoever, especially because of how he was spawned. So I'm not really sure that King Piccolo truly could be redeemed due to the nature of his creation, and also because of all of the horrible acts that he committed.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at Piccolo Jr., he's obviously a more redeemable character because, you know, there was a lot of time that passed, you know, at least from his perspective. He was born afterwards, even though he had his father's memories. He kind of was forced to befriend Goku and then kind of became a circumstantial friend and then eventually became a long-term friend. But when you look at his father, King Piccolo, I mean, just looking at the fact that this guy was trapped in that rice cooker from Master Mutaito for so long, like, you gotta think how much hate built up inside of him all that time. So, like, when he came out, he was gonna get what he wanted or die, you know? know, and that's exactly what happened. He was either going to get his way or was going to die, and he was completely determined to get the Dragon Balls, kill whoever was in his way to do it, and I think there would have been no way for King Piccolo to have been redeemed. And just looking at Kami, I think Kami pretty much proves everything about King Piccolo being unredeemable, because Kami in itself is essentially the good split of him, and by that very nature, because they were split between good and evil, that virtually by itself means that King Piccolo could have never have been redeemed.
Yeah, I find it very difficult because at the same time, like you said, he was sealed away for hundreds of years, and yet even during that time, it seemed like he never once considered like turning over a new leaf. You know, all he ever thought about was, when I get out of here, I'm gonna get revenge, I'm gonna wipe out all of humanity again, I'm gonna regain my youth, and basically just do everything as evil as possible as he possibly could do. So I feel like he could potentially become like an unwitting ally, or somebody who just is forced into a situation kind of like his son was, where he has to team up with somebody who's good. But I feel like, kind of like the person we're going to talk about next, that there's no real situation in which he could have just said, okay, I'm going to become good now. And he would actually, like, you know, do half the things that we see Piccolo doing now in Dragon Ball Super, like, you know, babysitting Pan, for example. I can't see the evil King Piccolo doing that.
Definitely, I'd have to agree.
Yeah, so getting into really perhaps the most evil component of Cell, and someone who I feel like from the very get-go, it's been demonstrated that he probably will never be redeemed, would have to be Frieza. And, you know, he's a character who has been given multiple times and multiple chances for him to actually be redeemed. And every single time he has always said, I will not be redeemed. I will not give up my evil ways. I'm just going to continue to plot and scheme and be maniacal and be basically that fusion of the Lex Luthor and Joker that we know from the comics, and, you know, put into the body of this unstoppable tyrant who has an insane amount of potential, not only for power, but for evil. So I feel like Frieza is probably the epitome of this question and of the irredeemable Dragon Ball villains, where no matter what situation you put him into, he might team up with Goku, or he might, you know, be someone who has to team up with somebody good in order to, you know, survive. But even after that survival, he's still going to remain evil, like as we saw with Dragon Ball Super.
I think the best comparison you could make to Frieza that has to be mentioned, Mike, and I think you make a lot of great points there, is actually to compare Frieza to Vegeta, right? Because when you look at Vegeta as a character, he's kind of similar to Frieza in the sense where, like, they were both, like, evil, but, like, you know, in Frieza's case in Super, he teamed up with Goku, and then Vegeta's case, he teamed up with Krillin and Gohan and Piccolo and all that stuff, because it was, like, kind of like, well, Frieza's, like, the ultimate bad guy, so we gotta, like, gang up on him. Even though I hate you and you hate me, we both hate this guy more. And then in Dragon Ball Super, it's kind of like, well, we both hate each other, but, like, we kind of want to exist, so we're gonna team up.
Yeah.
And I think the difference between Frieza and Vegeta is the fact that Vegeta shared a Saiyan heritage and bond with Goku and Gohan, whereas Frieza didn't. And I think because of that divide, and I think because Frieza wiped out the Saiyan race, I think because Frieza was given many chances and didn't take them, whereas Vegeta, you know, kind of benefited from Goku giving him a chance, I think that's where their characters truly are divided. You know what I mean? Because in Frieza's case, you know, it will never be forgotten that he wiped out the Saiyans, whereas Vegeta's kind of like, we're like the final few guys left of our race. And I think because of all of that and how many times Frieza has tried to kill Goku and his friends after, you know, dying. I mean, the guy came back in a mechanical form. He came back to life like 2 or 3 times, came back in a movie, came back in GT and Hell. Like, no matter what you do, he's always going to try to get his way. And I think that by itself will always make Frieza an unredeemable character. And I don't care what anybody says, Frieza can never be a good guy. He can fight on the side of good for his own selfish ambitions, but to be a good guy, it's impossible. And the same thing goes with Frost.
Yeah, I think it's certainly true that Frieza would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to truly be redeemed. And it's a good point that you make about how Frieza didn't really have a bond in terms of his species with Goku and Vegeta, but even when we saw his interactions with Frost, like, Frieza had no problem whatsoever eliminating basically his doppelganger from another universe universe and allowing him to be erased from existence. He basically laughed when it happened to Frost. So that pretty much shows you that even though he has kin, essentially, or even though he has people that belong to his clan, like even his own father, if they get in his way, then he doesn't care. He's going to get rid of them. And we saw that especially in Dragon Ball Super. So Frieza, I feel like, is the perfect example of a character who is both naturally and nurtured to be evil by his father and just by his own species. So I feel like Frieza is pretty much the epitome of a character that probably couldn't be redeemed in the Dragon Ball franchise.
Nope. And if Frieza were to ever be a good guy, I actually think that would kill the Dragon Ball series. Not kill it in terms of popularity, but... And here's the thing, Mike, I might sound ignorant on this, because when you look at 17 and 18, Fat Boo, Vegeta, Tien, even Yamcha to a more comedic way, there's been a lot of bad guys that have become good in Dragon Ball. I even look at the Pilaf gang, for crying out loud, right?
Yeah.
But I think out of all of the bad guys that have become good in Dragon Ball, I think Frieza is the one character that if Frieza became a good guy, that would hurt the series. He's the one character that I think needs to be evil. I don't know what you think of that.
Yeah, Frieza is really on a different level of evil and villainy from pretty much every other villain in the franchise. Not just in terms of like feats, but I mean in terms of literally the evil that this guy sinks to and his own goals, where he basically even doesn't care. He'll manipulate the very gods themselves to get what he wants. And, he's kind of like a dark side type of character where he's always going to be that true antithesis of what's good and right in the universe. He loves being evil, so it's kind of hard to redeem somebody who loves being evil. But of course, there are characters beyond who we talked about in this video, such as Nova and Ice Shenron, who I feel like have a pretty interesting dichotomy between the two of them, where even though they are siblings, even though they both were spawned by the Dragon Balls and the evil energy that had been built up within them, one of them, in Nova, still has a chance of being redeemed in the future, which I did mention in my video of the potential of the Shadow Dragons. But on the other hand, Ice Shenron seems like he's evil to the core and has zero redeeming qualities whatsoever about him.
Well, the thing with the Shadow Dragons, Mike, is that I think they kind of fall into that whole category of, they're not really an artificial creation, but they're kind of like a force of nature by default, because they are the evil Shadow Dragons that were created from negative energy, right? But I think in the case of Nova, I think he's still an evil Shadow Dragon. I think he just chose not to be evil in that instance, because eventually Goku had to kill him anyways to retract the Dragon Balls. And I think looking at Nova and Ice, I think one of them just had greater morals than the other. Yeah. Ice represents what all of the Shadow Dragons were to the core, along with Shenron. Like, Ice was literally cold. Like, he was cold-blooded. Like, he was purely into just getting his own way, getting the job done, whereas Nova was willing to, open up to fighting Goku at his best and not using cheap tactics. But at the same time, I still think Nova's intentions were evil. I just think that he was more redeemable than the other Shadow Dragons. So it's kind of like you have a room of 7 evil people, but one guy is less evil than the other 7. That's kind of how I look at Nova and Ice versus everybody else.
Pretty much. And when we saw Nova compared to like Sin Shenron, who would eventually become Omega Shenron, then you could really see the difference between the most evil of the Shadow Dragons, I would say, in Sin, versus somebody who has some sort of potential within him in Nova to actually become at least a willing ally of Goku and friends.
Well, let me ask you this, and I know this is not really a debate, but do you actually think Sin was more, evil than Ice? Because, I mean, at the same time, Sin kind of was playing around with Goku and Vegeta at certain points, and, was willing to, try and find the best ways for him to become as strong as possible. Whereas in the case of Ice, this is a guy who was willing to go after Goku's granddaughter and blinded him while he was weak just to get his own ways to win. What do you think of that and comparing those two?
I mean, I feel like Ice is definitely evil. He's definitely a character who doesn't really seem to have a problem with fighting dirty and going beyond any kind of code of morals. But, the very first introduction we get to Sin is him blasting Nova and basically turning on his own brother and turning on his own species. And then he absorbs the power of the other Shadow Dragons. And by his very existence, his evil karma, he is destroying the very universe around him. So I feel like even even if Ice isn't as evil as him, maybe it's kind of close, but I would probably give the edge to Sin and Omega Shenron.
Okay.
But anyway, guys, this has been our discussion talking about Dragon Ball's most irredeemable villains. Let us know your own thoughts down below. Do you agree with our picks, or do you think that some of these guys might be redeemable? Make sure to check out Qaaman's channel in the end screen and description of this video, and don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications so that you can see all of my videos right away when they come out. And if you like this video, then make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe, enable those damn notifications.